Good afternoon, everybody. So we are ready to start our panel discussion. I know it's a little difficult to have it after a delicious lunch, to have this panel discussion and still keep you awake. But I hope we will be interesting enough, and I think this is a topic which is of great interest to all of us. Just give me a second. So the topic of our panel discussion today is cybersecurity and Internet of Things. Is privacy dead? So I'll probably start the panel discussion with a quote from Eric Smith, the Google chairman, which he spoke during the panel in the World Economic Forum. The internet will disappear. There'll be so many IP addresses, so many devices, sensors, things that you are wearing, things that you are interacting with that you won't even sense it. It will be part of your presence all the time. Imagine you walk into a room and the room is dynamic. And with your permission and all of that, you are interacting with the things going on in the room. That'll be the impact of Internet of Things. I don't know what all things which we are wearing on our body will be interacting with internet. So your watch will be interacting, your shoes will be interacting, your clothes will be interacting. Obviously, your mobile phone is interacting with the internet. So that's the power of Internet of Things. But still, there are a lot of clouds around Internet of Things, and particularly what are the security threats involved when it comes to Internet of Things. So we'll be discussing today during our panel discussion with our distinct panel members from various industry sectors, what does Internet of Things mean for them? Maybe for some of us, it means home automation system. For some of us, it means manufacturing system. For some of us, it means medical equipment which are connecting to internet. So there are so many definitions. So we'll probably try to explore during our panel discussion if there's any common ground which we can come upon and define what does it mean for us as Internet of Things. We'll be talking about what are the unique cybersecurity challenges that IoT brings on the platform. Is it really an Internet of Things or is it an Internet of Fear? What are the unique perceived benefits from bringing in increased internet connectivity of the end user devices? What are we talking about? What is the benefits we'll get? Is it really a choice available to all of us? What could be the motivation in compromising the security posture of such IoT devices? And what could be the probable solution? So, I mean, I'll give probably the panel in a sequence 5 to 7 minutes to share their initial thoughts on this, and then probably we'll break down for a question and answer session. We want to actually have a very informal discussion on this because I think you are the focus of this whole discussion because you are the one who are going to get impacted. So I would like to probably encourage you to ask all the intriguing questions you have with the panel members. So we have 5 to 7 minutes for each of the panel members to probably talk about this. And after that, we will have a closure remarks and we'll talk about privacy. So, I mean, is there something called real privacy when we are talking about so many things connected on the internet? All our personal data is available on the internet, shared with the, commercial organization and everything. So, I mean, is there something called real privacy? So we'll talk about that interesting thing during the closing remark. So I'll probably give a brief introduction to the panel member because I don't want to go into details because we have such an amazing panel here. And if I probably go in details, we have to wait until the lunch. Until the dinner. So let's not do that. On my extreme left, we have John Lawrence. We actually lost Adli from APNIC, who was the information security consultant. But John Lawrence is a good buy. In place of Adli, he's an executive officer from the Electronic Frontier, Australia. Then to his right, we have Professor Pengwa. As you all know, he's a professor with NTU Singapore. Then we have Srideep. He's a blogger, social activist. He's also a steering committee member of Dynamic Coalition of Internet Right and Principle Coalition. So it'll be interesting to hear his thoughts from a youth perspective. Then, are you going to challenge me? Who is sitting in the center? He's Chester Sung. He's a prominent information security consultant. He's consulting a lot of government. He's consulting Hong Kong government on their information security initiative. So he probably shed some lights on how government particularly perceive threats from IoT. Then we have Zakir. He's a technology strategy and research professional, currently associated with Samena Council, Pakistan. Then we have Satish Babu. He's a prominent free software activist, founding director of IC Foss, and also the founder chair of ISOC Trivandrum chapter. So I'll probably start with John.
Okay, thank you. So as Mohit mentioned, I was a little bit of a late ring in, so I'm not going to speak for terribly long. But there's, I guess, a few sort of high-level issues that I think the Internet of Things certainly raises, and clearly I'm from a sort of civil rights, digital rights advocacy position, so the concerns around privacy and surveillance are pretty top of mind for me. I think personally that there are, we are sort of in many ways already within an Internet of Things context. I haven't seen too many people wearing devices. I think you're wearing it. Yep. Okay. Good. So we've got fitness devices. We've got connected watches, wearables. We've got cars that are talking to the internet. We've got smart fridges and smart TVs that listen to every word and send it off for analysis and all those sorts of things. So we're kind of already there, and I think a lot of the issues clearly still need to be worked through, and hopefully we can cover a lot of them today. I think from my personal perspective, I think the use case for a lot of these devices is really yet to be proven. I haven't worn a watch since I was about 12 years old. I've never really felt the need. I can probably see 5 time devices right here where I am, so that's my personal preference. So you'll never see me purchasing an internet-connected watch at any time. And I think many of these things, there's, as I said, yet to be really proven a use case and a demand for them, and the Apple Watch hasn't exactly sort of taken over the world. So we'll see how that goes, and that may just be me being a slight Luddite. But I think that's, I guess, in terms of sort of consumer devices. Clearly, there's a whole other range of industrial and so forth where there's a much more obvious and compelling use case. I think in terms of things like wearables and other devices, and we're kind of already there. Much of what I'm going to say already applies to the smartphone in your pocket, but we are sort of getting to a point where we are going to have completely pervasive and comprehensive surveillance of everything you do in your life, potentially including every beat of your heart. And that to me is a pretty concerning situation, and I think there's a genuine kind of possibility that we may actually sort of start to lose some of our humanity in all of this technology. So that's just a general personal concern that I've got. I'm sure that we'll go through all the security concerns and so forth, but there's clearly, I think, a need for us to make sure that we're not, the amount of data that's going to be generated by these devices, of course, is just astronomical. We need to be careful that we're not over-collecting that. We need to sort of be ensuring that we are, dealing with concepts of data minimization or data austerity, or the lovely German word Datensparsamkeit, which I quite like. And we need to obviously make sure that we're using open standards so that everything can talk to each other. And particularly, I think we need to make sure that we have opportunities for people that don't wish to use these sorts of devices to, so that, I'm fairly certain that you can't buy a car today, a new car in the market today, that isn't somehow internet enabled. And as long as you've got an ability to turn that off and turn that off properly and opt out, then that gives me a certain degree of comfort. But I think, we need to meet, and with everything sort of privacy related, it's about you having the ability to make a choice to be involved or not. So that's I think a very important point. So I'll leave it there.
Giving choice to the consumer. So, I mean, probably educating them, making them aware of what are the risks associated and leaving the decision to them. But also you raised an important point that it might not be a choice available going forward. So with this, probably I'll move it to Professor Pengwa.
Okay, hi, good afternoon. So being the academic here, let me begin by dividing things up and making things more complicated. So there is personal data protection, there's privacy, and then there's information, and they are quite separate. And so let me show you how they're separate. So if you think of personal data, what you mean is personally identifiable data, meaning your name, your phone number, your contact details, your particular identifiers of you. Could be your passport number, could be your identity card numbers. So personally identifiable data saying that you are who you are. This is different from privacy, which can be your secrets. Your secret may do with health, may do with money, or more commonly the lack thereof, speaking for myself. Your drug habit or vitamin habit, the mistress, if you are old enough, porno, you are young enough, right? So a whole plethora of little things that about you, but doesn't necessarily identify you without knowing, first of all, your personal data. So you need both the match of the personal data and then your secrets, and that's how you get a violation of privacy. But there is one more area that is kind of interesting for us. I have this Xiaomi fitness tracker, very cheap, less than 20 US dollars, including the heartbeat monitor, which is unfortunately not very accurate, but never mind, it's there. This the version that I had before I installed an alternative software app, the version I had actually wanted the contact details of all my friends. And right, that's right. So if you happen to be on my list of top, well, here's about 9,000 contacts here, or some duplicates. You would possibly have your contact being sent to somewhere in China without knowing it. This is really your personally identifiable data, because I would have your name, probably your phone number, your address, your working place, your occupation, and so forth. And your privacy would have been breached without you knowing it. Fortunately, me, the guy who reads all the fine print, especially to do with privacy, right, because I teach the class, I didn't install the app. In fact, I just checked, and the version they have now, they say they respect privacy, but they don't quite specify what they mean by they say they respect privacy. So I've still not installed the app. I've installed another app that doesn't take all these contact details. So this is where it gets really tricky, because what you have now is that although you may protect your own privacy, you are very careful, but someone else out there who may not be reading or may not even be aware that these details are being taken, this person could breach your privacy without you knowing it. This is a pretty scary part about the world we live in now, because of the prevalence of the ease with which such data can be taken. I've done a bit of a study looking at apps and the notices that they put, and in Singapore, I estimate that about, and I mentioned this earlier, that about half, in fact, a little more than half of the apps actually breach data protection laws in Singapore. Meaning that in most cases, they over-collect information. So this is independent even of your IoT, which may or may not breach your privacy depending, because it's to do with things. It may not have to do with you personally. But we're talking about apps, because apps are on your phone or on your laptop, and so they identify you, because typically you are the one using your phone, typically you are the one using a laptop. So if they can track it down to that machine or that phone, then it's really about you. So what this means is that, the title is whether privacy is dead. In fact, therefore, what it means is that privacy or data protection should not be dead. It should be even more alive. It should be even more alive to protect us, so that the companies putting on these apps do not over-collect the information. Why do they need to know contact details of all my friends when all they need to know is the fitness of me? Why do they need to know the phone numbers of my friends, right? don't over collect information, and if they have some privacy laws, some data protection laws, then they must be able and willing to enforce those laws. And so to that extent, therefore, in fact, I would say that with IoT, it calls for an even greater awareness of privacy and data protection laws and greater enforcement of such laws. Thank you.
I think you raised a very important point that it's also not only the users. I mean, but also I mean, there's a responsibility which the intermediaries and other parties which also have to bear while they are collecting the data. So thank you for that. Now let's move on to Shrideep. I would like to hear from you, Shrideep. I mean, what does youth look at it from an IoT? Are they really looking at IoT as a next thing? Are they aware of what are the risks associated with it? What are they doing about it?
You know, especially when you look at it from the youth perspective, you know, it's like technology rocks, right? It simply rocks, you know, like you have these devices that are like so fascinating and fast and good, and you can do so many stuff. So we are more thinking about, let's give it a shot, but as Pengwa said, you know, we need to focus on more safer side of it as well. When you talk about technology, I strongly believe that technology is like a knife. You know, it's about how you use it. So it's all about the morals and values and the things about it. And especially if you look at the South Asian perspective, or you know, the Asian perspective, then it's something like technology has been transferred to us without you know, without any preparation. We are like, we just got technology. We're just evolving in most of the countries in Asia, right? So there is a basic need about developing the core values about you know, technology, human rights, cybersecurity, all these things, and we need to work on it. And we have not been working on it. Like on real terms, if you look at the cybersecurity policies of Southeast Asia, you know, they have a standard. They all are like up. But when it comes to practice, things don't work out. We have freedom of expression, but do we have it in reality? No. So that's the real case. And why is it happening? It's because we are not working towards the core values. We are not developing, we are not targeting, you know, like we have course studies which focus on specifically on what is computers. We need to have sessions, we need to, you know, do some capacity building, raise awareness in terms of political leadership as well as youth. So that's like something where we have to work.
Thank you, Shrideep. I appreciate your reactions, particularly from a youth perspective, and I also like your energy. So so let's move on to Chester. Chester, I would like to hear from you. I mean, particularly on this issue, what does information security community has to say about this issue, and also how does government look at it? I mean, are they doing a proper risk evaluation when they are going to probably connecting our energy and utility sector? Because that's also one of the things which they are considering. I mean, particularly in subcontinent, I know Indian subcontinent, they are considering more and more, I mean, automation when it comes to utility sectors, and which are key areas and which might be having a lot of impact if we don't do a proper risk assessment.
Thank you, Mohit. Well, to me, I guess the security and privacy of IoTs comes in, I guess, two aspects. Well, first, of course, the security, which is, I guess, the protection on the data, you know, on devices. And second is probably the information that it collects, like the breadth and depth of, you know, these devices, because, you know, it goes like previous speakers were saying, you know, it goes way into your personal life, your health information, your car, your fridge, your habits, you know, how much electricity you're using on a daily basis, which is quite intrusive. You know, if that's not what you like, you know, and now I guess on the security front, there are many people, I guess, I mean, both from the industry and academias, on cryptography, for example, helping to provide new tools in securing the data inside. Now, But my concern on that is, we all know in the security profession, I mean, the IT security professional, that things change too fast. I don't know how many times you have updated or upgraded your software, your mobile phone or apps softwares on your computers in the last 3 months. And not to mention the bugs and the security or the zero-day attacks that we mentioned on systems. And this all could and have been happening to IoT devices. And in some other security conferences, hacker conferences, people have already demonstrated hacking into cars. And remotely controlled it. So this is not like the future. This is today. And I guess from my experience, not only advising the government but also working at the DPA, I think it comes in a breath where I guess the government, a lot of them are not ready to, or they don't know enough, basically to know how to protect the personal data or the privacy on these devices, because a lot of it, first of all, we need to know what is personal data. I mean, Professor Peng Hua mentioned something, a concept that we all need to know, which is personal data privacy and personal privacy. A lot of times when we go to privacy conferences, regulators talk about personal data privacy, not your personal privacy. A lot of people, they confuse the two. They thought like, well, okay, well, you guys, regulators should protect, they're looking after our privacy, but they're not. They're looking after your personal data. And what are personal data? They are defined under their respective laws. So what if for those data or metadata that are collected by the device, by the IoT devices, a lot of them are not defined under their respective law. So that means they're not protected, unless of course they are assembled together. Of course we say that, but I think sadly to say, sometimes this is used as an excuse by DPAs not to do further action, because when we think about further steps to enhance this picture, we have to go back to legislation, and that's a big barrier. The head of DPAs, they are often reluctant to go to that step, which is could be quite challenging to them. And I think one, I guess, last comment I'd like to make is to your questions. I guess you mentioned, like, the question is like whether privacy is dead. I think it's just the rule is changing. It's like we used to privacy used to mean your secrets or things that you like to keep to yourself. Not necessarily, super sensitive or embarrassing, but something that you don't necessarily want the public to know. But today, with the help of internet and especially mobile apps, IoT devices, it becomes an area or a space that is heavily controlled, monitored, and is full of actors, players who are like even trading of this information. So I think it's just that the rule of privacy is not the same as what we expected or we knew.
Thank you, Chester. I mean, yeah, the rules are changing. The privacy rules are changing. The definition of security to some extent is changing. And also, you have made a fair distinction when it comes to what is the personal privacy and what is the privacy of personal data. So I mean that's a fair distinction you have made. Now we move on to Zakir. Zakir, we would like to know from you, telecom sector being a core integral part of this whole transition from being connected to the internet to, machines connected to the internet. There will be a lot of machine to machine talk will be happening, and telecom sector will have a great role to play when it comes to secure data transfer also between machine to machine. So is telecom sector ready for this transition?
Thank you, Mohit. This is Zakir for the record. I think, yes, telecommunication industry, the overall access technologies or the access ecosystem is so very important to this IoT debate. That is because it, at the end of the day, is the telecommunication systems and the ISPs that enables us and the IoT operators or, the service providers to be able to access data, to move it even within the borders or maybe crossing the international borders, which really is a cause of concern for a lot of segments within the industry. So you see, internet. This Professor Bishop of Harvard University once said that you don't really know when exactly will the transition take place. The idea is that you actually have to understand it, that it will, and then get prepared for it. So the actual thing is that we need to be prepared for it. IoT in itself is sort of a disruptive technology from from its applications point of view. You have its very good uses in health, in automobile industry, in the agriculture, in education, in real estate. In every sector, we've got a very good use of IoT. But the problem arrives when it plays with your privacy, right? And not even privacy or monitoring. You see, for example, I don't have problems with my data being monitored or surveilled or compromised or whatever. I have a problem when a decision is based on that data, and that is the problem with big data. When big data is combined with IoT and inferencing and certain algorithms, or then being used by different entities to be able to arrive at a conclusion, and that is something that is dangerous. And for that, the industry, the different stakeholders need to convene and come up with something really practical in terms of privacy and stuff like that. Coming to your point about telecommunication industry, for example, you see in the industry we've been getting very interesting statistics. Gartner, for example, is telling us there are almost 7 billion devices connected to the internet. Cisco, on the other hand, claims there are already 17 billion devices connected to the internet. So yeah, it actually, the industry, the IoT industry is evolving. It might be slow in South Asia, might be fast in Pacific or Europe, might be at a medium speed in the Middle East. But the fact is that this is something that really is coming in, and we need to be prepared for it. So in terms of the telecommunication and the access industry, they are not actually prepared for it. The reason behind is, in the previous workshop, we were discussing that on the technology front, we are evolving. There is a huge amount of investments and innovations that is taking place in the industry. But on the policy, the regulation, and the legislation, and that is something that really needs a huge amount of work to be able to face this, this IoT thing, which I personally call it. I don't call it Internet of Things. I call it weapon of mass disruption, because it is creating, disruptions in every aspect of our life. Every aspect of our life. So it's a very innovative, very disruptive technology. The reason for the fact is that we really need to build capacities and share experiences and to be able to be ready for what exactly is this going to be in the future, in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Zakir. I think for your comments and your thoughts on this whole topic. But I think I just want to highlight one point which you made is data by itself is not disruptive. But what is disruptive is, or what is dangerous is when organizations, governments start making decisions based on that data. I mean, which is very personal to you. So for instance, if there is an example of an insurance company which just hikes your premium because you are probably driving at a very fast speed, or probably you are not a very safe driver, or maybe something else, yeah.
That this privacy thing, for example, I'm using an IoT application or a smartphone applications, and because of my being using an IoT application, someone else's privacy is being compromised, because, for example, the data on my PC, on my device might contain my contacts, picture and stuff like that. So when that data, gets to the server of the IoT service provider, so there is something, somebody who is not even using that IoT application, and then his or her data is at the same time being compromised, and it goes to there. So there is something, again, the decision that is being made on the IoTs, and then again the privacy of others who are not actually using IoT applications, their data or their privacy is being compromised. So that is something of great concern.
Okay, thank you, Zakir. If we have Zahangir online. Okay, no problem. So I think to our rescue we have Satish. Satish is a, veteran technologist, and whenever we have an issue, we always go to technologists and we ask them for a solution. So we have heard solutions when it comes to, from law enforcement, from regulatory perspective, from both Pengua as well as from Chester, that these could be a problem solution. How do we address this risk which IoT has been raising? Now probably we'll look forward to a technological solutions. What could be the solutions which the industry has to offer to probably mitigate those threats which are coming along?
Thank you, and very happy to be here for the session. The theme of our regional IGF is the cyber physical worlds and so on. And IoT has a very prominent place there. And when you integrate cyber, physical, and biological, which is happening now with genomic data, we're actually having the grand unification, so-called fourth industrial revolution, and so on, which has got its own kind of impact coming up. The first problem that I see is the problem of the dumb user. Now, all of us have been dumb users at some point in our lives. The problem is that there are a new 1 billion dumb users joining. Now, when you put this 1 billion with the fact that some of them may be careless in using the internet, we have a huge threat that comes up, the threat vector of this 1 billion people. Not all of them are going to use IoT devices directly, but the mobile phone is also now an IoT device. So from that perspective, this is a big risk that is going to happen. And when you note that this 1 billion is all, generally people who are not so educated, not so well off, the threat becomes magnified. That's the first point. The second point is that there are already so many humorous comments. You heard about Internet of Useless Things, Internet of Infected Things, Internet of Insecure Things. People are projecting all kinds of things onto this IoT, basically because the risks that it kind of project. And also we have things like implantables, injectables, and ingestibles that you can swallow, that you can implant under your skin. But these are operating very close to my body. I have a right to know if these things have an insecurity angle to this. So these are new issues that are coming up, which are perhaps not there in earlier generations of data. And this insurance company thing that was mentioned right now, it's a big problem because the moment the data becomes kind of public, it can be kind of leveraged by various business entities. We have the smart city, smart grid, smart vehicles, etc. as a part of the Internet of Things. The smart city, what does it mean to hack a smart city? Today you cannot hack a city, but tomorrow you can hack a city. A smart grid. India lost power for 500 million people some time back, but that is because of a cascade tripping of the power grid. But if you can hack into a power grid, what does it really mean? We still do not know. We have not defined the problem as yet. So the magnitude and the scale and the impact is not known. Some of these things. Citizens. I was reading a thing where they were saying in a smart city, citizens are city sensors, meaning citizens become sensors with their mobile phones. Whether they like it or not is a separate. You kind of install an app and you become a sensor. and people start reading things through you. Now, we do not even know, whether we are being used that way. And we have also in IoT the fact that many of these devices are arrays of a single device. You hack one, you hack all. So it's very easy to kind of get into scale. M2M was mentioned, there's no human intervention. So my fundamental point here is that when there is no human intervention in some of these things, machines are deciding on our behalf. There is this issue of ethics, which is again I pointed out in the first session. And the issue of when an autonomous car is going to hit somebody, etc., etc. Whose life should they protect? The person who's sitting in the car or the person who's outside where that's going to hit? And more important, who decides this? The software writer is going to decide this. Now, is that an ethical kind of a thing? Who should be deciding? On what basis should society say that somebody should be deciding on this? Because it's a life and death issue. So these are issues that come up, and as an open source person, I strongly feel that some of these things should be exposed. The code should be exposed, because as a programmer, my currency is code, and I deal with code. You show me code, I'm happy. But if you have obscure code, a device that is sitting close to my heart, and nobody knows what the code is, then I have a problem with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Satish. You highlighted some of the key risks associated with the technology. And also, what you brought forward is there's not much of awareness. When it comes to what are the threats, which this can probably pose to the whole human society and to the community. This is one of the prominent reason why there's not sufficient debate of the security risk associated with it, because when it comes to more sexy security breaches, like when it comes to financial fraud, there's a huge tangible, we can actually quantify the breach. But when it comes to these kind of soft, IoT kind of breach, we don't know. What if somebody reads my data from my fridge? I don't know what are the security threats association. So, that's great to hear from the panel. Now we'll probably open up the, forum to the questions from the, So, can somebody?
This is Guo Weiwu. I was an ICANN board, and ICANN is registered in California. As you know, if you are the senior officer in California, by law, you have to learn 2-hour courses about the sex harassment, 2 hours in racialism. This is by law. So let's back to the IoT. If the IoT, because the IoT is designed by engineer, but the problem is many engineers, they don't have a legal background. Okay, but in many of the Asia countries, we already have a data protection law. I think in Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, many of them already have that. I think we should acknowledge the government asking IoT company, the engineer, at least they need to understand the data protection law, because they don't have a legal background. They don't know what the product they develop will violate the legal, the data protection law. Second, when IoT design, as we know, there is a certain of the internet port. And in most of the case, many of the engineers never really care to shut down, shut off those ports. Is not necessary. So we should have to asking the engineer, they have to limit the port available. So limited the information leaking. For example, in Taiwan, as you know, many years, there is an APP, is underdeveloped. Even now, we find that most of the APP developer, they leave all the port open. It's crazy. If you leave the port, all the port open, how you can tell me they secure? So let at least something we can do. Give the engineer a legal education. Give the engineer know they should not open all the port unless it is necessary.
Sorry. Do you want to answer that first? Oh, that's fine. Okay, I want to add one more question on Mr. Satish. Sometimes it's a hardware problem. You can't patch a hardware problem. All right, just want to say that. It's increasing common because Internet of Things is not just a software thing anymore. Not everything is a Linux computer. Something is just a chip and hardware burned together. All right.
Well, last thing first. Well, I sort of I respectfully disagree with this comment on hardware software because this world there's no pure hardware. Hardware always contains software, but that leads to. But I certainly understand where it comes from because the problem with a lot of these devices. They cannot be fixed. I mean, by the end user, by the owner. The owner has no access to what's inside, not even the configuration. You have a car. Most people don't know how many computers are in their car. Not even what they have right now. So and that leads to an issue that I think is important from the perspective on how IoT devices are getting so popular or fast growing because of its cost, of its low cost, and you can imagine like with a sensor that's that costs you as less than $1, like I think it's what 12 cents or something. I forgot the current price, what cost for that, but how much you can, from that percentage, how much you can really put in on assuring the security of that device or sensor is up to date. I mean, of course, like I said, we have a lot of people working on securing the information on the devices, on sensors, but what happens after they are shipped outside factory? Okay, do we have costs? Do we have the resources to make sure those devices maintain secure 6 months from production 2 3 years from production from sale, right? And to I guess feedback to Gorwei's question or comment, I think is something that I kind of thought about before. How can we improve this? Because from a DPA's perspective, I don't, it's quite impossible for a DPA to have the authority, which I wish they had, but the authority to like examine and review all these the applications use of these IoT devices because they're crossing so many aspects of someone's life, and so broad from so many industries, so that's from government's bureaucratic structure, it's pretty hard to have one authority to look after that, and this is one of the few areas or application that I would actually prefer the protection of personal data or privacy in this concept of consumer protection rather than human rights.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raised an important paradox we have in the industry where the whole intention of going to IoT is cost saving or probably operational efficiency, and we bring on top of it the security, which is kind of an overhead. So I mean, industry has to kind of digest this, that it is no more an overhead but an integral part of this. So we are talking about security with design. I mean, security by design.
Yeah, sure. I was going to add to that as well. Yes, that Corey's point is noted that engineers don't have the legal training, and so they may not be aware of exactly what they're doing. But that's not really an excuse for any product, because the product is out there. It has to be safe for the consumer at the end of the day. I mean, the chair you sit on has to be safe to meet your standards, your comfort, so that no harm will befall you when you use it. So I don't see why, in the case of your IoT, that there should be any exemption at all. It should just meet your safety norms, which in this case happens to include personal data protection. And I don't think it's really that complicated. I think that there should be some kind of understanding that you don't over-collect data, because actually you're exposing the company to liability. The more data you collect, the more you must keep secure, the more you must prevent leakages. So that, in fact, increases your liability. Why do that? So you should only collect what you need and then use that according to what you need. So I think that some basic understanding should be necessary in when you have this IoT, especially if you want your product to have a major consequence, like some major impact worldwide. If you don't want it to be big, just want it to be small, that's okay. But you want it to be big, then hey, you got to play a different game altogether.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes, hello. I would like to shift the discussion a little bit. I think one of the main issues with IoT is that we need to rethink how we come up with ideas and ideas around the data environment. And to give you a simple example is the smart city discussion at the moment. And what you see all over the planet is that cities come up with the most boring suggestions, which are completely based on public-private partnerships, and they come up with some traffic data collection and some optimization of utilities and so on. But what is missing, and what's also now coming into this discourse, is that we need open innovation. And open innovation means that we create models where the data objects or the citizens are actively involved in shaping their data environment. That applies to insurance companies, that applies to car companies. That means in everything where the human being is also somebody who sends and collects data, is involved in how we shape our environment. And I think that is really the biggest challenge, that we have go away from public-private partnerships to public-private people partnerships. And that's happening, for instance, in Amsterdam. You have, for instance, an open-sourced citizen IoT, which is the Things network, which is based on LoRaWAN. And so this is a very low-cost IoT solution, and I think it has triggered a lot of ideas coming from the citizens on how to make the city more livable, more safe, and more enjoyable without relying on the big IT solution providers. And I think that is actually what could come out of this whole IoT discussion, how to really involve a needs-based innovation discourse. Thanks.
Okay. So actually that already happened. Okay, it's on my phone right now. I literally assembled this sensor within 5 minutes or so. It's a free API, by the way. It's really fun. So I call this the office sensor. Oh, by the way, I don't want to expose the API because they got the light. So I don't want people to know that nobody is in the office. Very dangerous. But it already happened. It's actually internet connected device is already one of the hot topic among hobbyist electronic nowadays. So I think we should check the maker community for that. Thanks.
Actually, this year, when I can have a retreat in Amsterdam, we actually visit one of our IoT company. The company idea is marvelous. The company don't control the data. Consumer control your data. And I think that is a good design. the IoT design from them. They don't collect data until consumer you agree. So thinking about it, we should educate the people. That is the right design.
A couple of responses. I completely agree with this whole innovation at the grassroots concept. With the Raspberry Pi Zero at $5 and several other clones now, it is indeed possible to kind of have grassroots level people's innovation happening. I've also seen cities doing sensible things with this whole IoT concept. At Los Angeles a year back, the IT head of the city was talking to us. This is an ICANN meeting. And he was saying we have used IoT to convert the written policy of the city to actual practice. The written policy was public transport shall get the highest priority among all kinds of traffic. So we were asking, how has IoT helped in this? So he asked us a question back. He says, how do you think you can get the fastest from one end of LA to the other end? We said, you get a fast car or a motorbike. He said, no. Follow the red bus. The red bus is the public transport. So he says the entire system is all these signals are so wired with sensors on these buses that whenever a public transport bus goes, it opens up. It becomes green. And that is therefore the fastest way to get across the city. And this is the policy. This is what the policy says, that public transport gets the highest priority. So that is a very kind of insightful thing for us, for the listeners, because we felt that this is a good use. We have actually kind of wired up a city like this. So the smart city story is still kind of unfolding. We do not know how creatively people will be able to use this. There are also risks which are also, the whole data ownership and, a bunch of risks that are there. But I think there are also, both at the level of grassroots innovation, as well as some cities which are looking at it out of the box, there are possibilities.
Yeah. I like the idea of having security by design. So engineers and designers who design these devices, IoT devices, have to think about the security aspect of the device. For example, if somebody use that device in future, what kind of security threats will be there? So that kind of thinking should be there from the beginning. And if they think that there will be such security issues in future when people using these devices, there should be mechanism to update the device. For example, if they think that there will be problems in the firmware or the operating system of the device, there should be a mechanism to update the device remotely by connecting to the vendor server, etc. Sorry, this is my comment.
As a non-technician, one of the biggest challenges I can see is this, keeping things updated, and particularly when you're dealing with manufacturers that are not sort of from the technology space originally, and I think that's a massive challenge. And one, I guess, a sort of a question that comes to my mind is what is the potential for 10, 15 billion kind of not terribly updated and patched IoT devices being sort of harvested into a massive sort of Uber botnet? I mean, that strikes me as a pretty significant risk.
I think this issue of botnets, Windsurf is kind of famously known for talking about this thing of 10,000 refrigerators attacking the Pentagon. As an example of what this kind of thing can degenerate into. There are actually technical protocols that are evolved to update on the fly these devices. But there are severe constraints. All these devices use very low power stacks. So the TCPIP stack is severely truncated and made low power. And these are often in mesh topologies, where there is a huge bunch of these sensors and there's only one gateway. And all the external kind of contact has to be through that gateway. This imposes actually structural constraints on how fast, how efficiently you can do this update. So this is actually a risk.
Yeah. Do we have any other question?
Do we also have a question from the remote? Probably we won't. Is there any question from the remote? Okay. Go ahead.
Hello. I have a question. It's sort of related to IoT, but assuming that we're surfing on the web, and then we entered a website, and then the website doesn't require, doesn't ask for the user's permission to use cookies. So then, as far as I know, cookies actually are short-term memories for the website that actually traces whatever you search on the website and keep it as the data. So next time you visit, they actually will know what you're going to search and your preferences. So I'm not sure for in Asia, but I know that in Europe they have policies for actually asking for permission for users to either to accept the use of cookies or not. But do you think that the lacking of the permission part is unlawful, or should the part of either the user should be asked the question of yes or no using the cookies, is that a mandatory thing, or is that should that be kept unaware of, so then the user can just go on being unaware of actually them being monitored and being collected as data?
Okay, thank you very much for this question. A little technical, actually. Asking user for accepting or not accepting the privacy, the cookies policy. I mean, if in a region, if in a particular environment there is a law on it, and an application or web service provider, they are not using the law, then it obviously is violation of the law. It's illegal, right? But say, for example, in European Union, we actually have a law on that, and that's why when you visit a European website, so you actually get this pop-up asking you for, do you agree to the cookies policy or not? So if, for example, if you are accessing a website in Asia, you don't actually get that pop-up. So that's why we cannot actually say that this is kind of, illegal, because we don't have a legislation from a regional body or, an organization that actually had enacted something to that will bound the web service providers within Asia to, adhere to those principles or to those laws. So, I mean, in a region where there's no law, then it's okay for web service providers to provide, to not ask the user for, the cookies thing. And if there is a law and they are not using it, then this is violation of the law.
Yeah, just to add to that, well, what you were referring to is the cookie law from the EU, which is kind of regarded by the data protection experts as a failure. Because of course it kind of warn users before they reach the site, but really it leaves users very little choice, real choice in terms of protecting privacy, because the other option you don't choose, you can choose is not to visit the site. I mean, you don't visit the site, or you accept what they are planting into your computer on your browsers. So it's sort of like different. Not that I believe the model is perfect, but what, for example, the current version of Android is doing, at least it shows a little bit of improvement on that front. Because if you install an app on your current on the Android device now, or current versions, basically the app has to apply or ask the user for permission for each of the X privileges that the app has once. And then you have the right to, or you have the option to turn individually off after you install the application, the app. So I see certain level of improvement on that, but of course, how Google or how the various developer of the variants of Androids enforce that, is something else.
I think that sort of brings us nicely back and sort of in the concept of sort of opting out. And I think that kind of granular opt-out is really, really important, particularly with any sort of consumer device. Just a binary on-off thing in most cases is probably not really, very valuable. It's likely to render your device fairly, depending on what it is, it may render it fairly useless and is therefore essentially meaningless. So I think having that capability to, really get granular control over what you do. Perhaps I might have a Fitbit and I want to sync it with my iPhone, but I don't want to sync it to the cloud. That's entirely appropriate. You should be able to control that sort of thing. And I think that's a really important part of sort of this data control and how we move forward. One example I wanted to throw out there, and I suspect this is happening elsewhere as well, but we already have health insurance companies in Australia that are doing trials with customers, sending them a Fitbit or equivalent device, and setting them certain health challenges and saying if you can meet these parameters, such as 20,000 steps a week or whatever it is, and certain other things, then we'll give you a discount on your health insurance. Now that's all well and good. I imagine that's a fascinating experiment for them, and they're generating some really, really interesting and valuable data. The problem is we sort of are then therefore kind of heading to a situation where essentially anyone that, potentially where anyone that refuses to use one of these devices in the future will have to pay a premium. And that's a concern that I have, is that there will be genuine financial, potentially also social costs to opting out of these things. And I think that's something we need to be wary of. And of course, that already happens to some extent. There are social costs to not using Facebook, for example, that are very real for many people. So, we need to make sure that the concept of opt-out is real, I think, is the point I'm trying to make. And that's not a straightforward thing to do in any way.
Yeah. Is there any other question from the...
Okay. So there are like a huge usage of IoT devices like IP cameras and IoT gateways these days in households. However, most people didn't know how to really set up these things, so they just use default settings or they just plug and play, which is very dangerous for security reasons. There's like, you can easily use Google search to banner grab these devices that are not protected by passwords because they didn't do it on factory settings. So what do you think like the regulations that can do to enforce OEM to improve on the factory settings, like forcing users to change their password on the first time, or policies like these?
Anybody want to answer?
I think this goes back to my original point about dumb users. All of us want to buy something, fit it up, and immediately get results. We sometimes don't have the patience to change the default settings. The default settings are a huge problem, and you can even today, as he says, scan on Google for cameras specifically, which are kind of left open like this. So I think user awareness building has to happen as a generic cross-cutting thing, because for every single device, this thing is going to happen. There was a generation back, 10, 15 years back, there was this case of new system administrators buying a Windows box or a Linux box and installing it, connecting the network out of the box, just leaving it like that. And that had so many vulnerabilities. So now that we have got over that. So the next generation is the next billion who's joining with these kind of devices. We can have some factory programming. Okay, first time you have to change your settings and all that, but still people will find out a way to kind of go get around that actually. So user awareness building is very key to this.
I think by the time Mike is coming, I just wanted to have a follow-up question on what this gentleman asked is, when we talk about these cookie business, I mean, while we have some regulatory measures which kinds of educate user about what they are getting into, but essentially, don't you think that it's just about transferring the risk? I mean, we are just making user liable for his action, and I mean, to be very frank, I mean, though we are technologists to some extent, I mean, we all accept the cookies. It just becomes a matter of using it or not using it. That brings me back to John's point. I mean, we should not I mean, if there should be a choice available to the end user that if he really want to have that risk and still want to use the service. So, I mean, it should not be a denial of service for him if he doesn't want to probably have accepted to the cookie policy. So probably some of the panel member can answer that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Yuan. I live in Taiwan. When discussing things like that, I like to think about the ecosystem problem, because it's a very complex problem. So we can say that there's a technical problem, there's economics problems, down system, etc. But I'm especially interested in 2 points. Chester just said that the government is not ready, and when we talk about privacy, many persons will think that the government should do regulation, law enforcement, etc. However, does that really make sense? I mean, in the another conference where we were talking about is surveillance justified? So perhaps governments are those who want privacy to be dead, and especially for some governments who would like to know more about their people, so they can stop crime. That is a question, or they can attack their enemy in politics, or this is never the important thing for politicians. Things related to votes are like building roads, building bridges. Later on, that may be the money source of some politicians. So when you are interacting with governments, is things like this really something that governments pay attention to? Because if it's not, it will never be resolved. That is from the perspective of an ecosystem. And I will tell my second question together. And when Professor N mentioned that companies should collect information just enough. But in the big data world, where data is money, and there are a lot of many companies that they haven't figured out a way to make use of the data. So they may just think, let's collect it now as much as I can. And as when we are talking about liabilities, you just mentioned, but like the Xiaomi wristband you just showed us, for a company like those in China, privacy, is that really an issue? Or for those companies, to their benefit, they would like to collect as much data as possible, as long as regarding liability, well, perhaps that's never an issue. And I don't know, that's just my personal thought, but I'm thinking from the perspective of an ecosystem. Thank you.
I'm not really agree about it. I respond for that. The government, the company, if they want to collect the data, unless they don't have data protection law. If they have a data protection law, they collect more data than the data protection law allow. They are already illegal. First. And I don't want to compare, you are talking about China, because they don't have a data protection law. Okay? But thinking about it, if such company doing the same thing. In Europe, look how the European friends, how the friends find the Google how many money? $1 billion. $1 billion. Unless your kind of company, you don't want to survive. So no excuse, to be honest. Unless the country, the people, they don't know. Such as in Taiwan, with the data protection law. If you collect the data more than you need, or illegally, sorry, you already fled. And you just take a chance, wait for somebody, go to the court to sue you. So I think any company have no excuse. So I don't know. The data protection law is published, is in Taiwan, more than 3 years. So I believe in Singapore. Can you do that? I don't know, so I can do it. I don't believe it. What about Hong Kong? You have data protection law, right? So in my company, I violate the data protection law, correct the illegal data. Is the Hong Kong government agree? Say, oh, it's okay. I can give you an excuse. That is wrong. That is not excusable.
So I certainly really no knowledge whatsoever of Singapore's data protection law, but certainly in Australia, our privacy law sets standards and principles, but certainly doesn't in any way prescribe what information can and can't be collected. And I think to go back to sort of your question about do governments have interest in this data, I think the answer is very, very obviously yes. I think we've seen, we had a debate in Australia over the last couple of years about mandatory data retention, which of course is framed around phone and internet access, but of course actually the way the legislation is worded would start to incorporate data from IoT devices potentially. And you know, in the name of national security and of course catching pedophiles is always the other excuse. You know, we have what I think are fairly extreme retention. We have a 2-year period. To some extent, still working out the detail of actually what is collected, but it's clear that government would like the data to be there in order that they can go back and look at it just in case. And I think if you think about the sort of data that's already been collected, so with your mobile phones, of course, including your location whenever you make or receive a call, receive a text, and if they get into the cell data, then even just the fact that your phone is on, you can be tracked fairly accurately. So that's a pretty intrusive situation right there, which is tracking your movements. If you start to add in things like an internet-enabled car, there's even more movement tracking. Say if you've got you know, a smart house with an electronic device that opens your door that records that in a log somewhere. I mean, all this information will be of interest to law enforcement and intelligence. There's no doubt about that. The question is, you know, is it appropriate for them to have access to that? One of the biggest challenges we have in Australia, of course, is that all this data is available without a warrant, and that's our biggest concern at the moment. But I think there's no doubt that that governments generally, and particularly coming from the sort of law enforcement and intelligence perspective, they would like the data to be there in case they need to go back and look at it at some point. And I think the experience we've had is they will ask for as much data as they think they can get away with. Yeah. We need to fight them.
Yeah. I agree with Huawei about the case that, you know, the gentleman mentioned that data can be collected sort of in almost like a dragnet kind of thing. No, the data protection laws, generally speaking, allow this. you cannot collect data just in case. You have to specify why you're collecting the data. You have to justify why this particular bit of data. And it's kind of a principle with all protection laws. So let me give you one case where I have a Xiaomi tracker and I have a Xiaomi phone. I'm a supporter of Xiaomi. My student asked me, why buy these workers a phone, you know? It's cheap, good. Okay, Xiaomi phone, when it first came to Singapore, it violated the data protection laws because it sent the contact details of whoever bought the phone back to China, and whoever bought the phone started receiving spam from China. And as you say, it doesn't break the law in China, it doesn't break the law in China, but it breaks the law in Singapore, and Xiaomi would have been fined. They were stopped, and they stopped doing that, so you know, I don't get spam from China when I buy the Xiaomi phone. So I think it's always point that even though you may be a company operating out of some jurisdiction like China, which has no data protection laws, if you want to play the game globally, you have to abide by global norms. This is what the world expects. So if you don't want to play by global norms, that's fine, and you know, stick in your own backyard. But once you go global, you have to adopt a best practice, global norms, and global norms says you cannot collect data just in case. You have to show why you collect the data. And talking about big data, I often see companies collecting, of course, a lot of data, but it's often what we call data exhaust. So let's look all of us here in this room. We have data exhaust, not from parts of your body, but from your mobile phone. And the data exhaust is, there is a mobile phone here. It is not moving. And once you move on the road, then you can see these dots moving. And I've seen some plots showing the plots in traffic. And if, for example, you see the dots are not moving on a highway, it tells you there's a traffic jam there. And that's how we use some of these examples, how we use big data for some of this use. So big data doesn't necessarily break data protection laws, because knowing that the phone is there, it just says the phone is there, doesn't say who, it just says the phone is there. So big data can still survive without necessarily breaking data protection laws.
Thank you. I think in the view of time, we won't be able to take much questions now, but I think I just want to have a last question to the panel, because our MSG kinds of insist on gender balance. So I would like, I mean, maybe it's not related, but I would like to ask, is there any specific risk which IoT kind of poses to specific gender or maybe specific demographics? So is there anything? I mean, unfortunately, we didn't have any panel member from other gender, so probably. Yeah, I'll take that blame. Okay.
So here is a interesting news that reported. Now we are all aware that we use the car ride hailing applications like Uber and Ola. This is a case when a researcher was finding out what app is actually collecting from the mobile phone and giving to the backend. So it was found that the app collects things like the battery level currently, the signal of the mobile phone, the date and time, and it is pushing it backend. The question was raised: why does backend require all this? It so happens that these cars, I mean, these systems have two kinds of pricing: the normal pricing and the surge pricing. Apparently, what is happening at the backend, that is this person having low battery, low network place? If so, charge him or her surge pricing. Now, if you project it, so somebody is pointing out, if you also know the gender of the user, you have a situation that late at night, low battery, low signal, it's a woman, you charge surge. Now, this is a differential impact. If, I mean, the company, of course, refused. The company said, we are not doing anything on this. There's no way to kind of look at that. So, it is actually a differential impact on women if such a thing is happening. Thank you.
I didn't expect an answer to that, but good. Somebody want to add anything? Otherwise, we'll just move to the closing remarks. So I have specific questions now. I mean, I just wanted to ask from a panel that we always probably criticize the government for excessive surveillance, but when it comes to the large corporations, I mean, they collect a lot of our data, which is more than what is expected for the unique delivery of the service which they are into. But we never question them, or we question them, but I mean, we are not left with the choice, as John said, that it's about you using the service. You have to probably buckle down to, the terms of game, and we probably accept. It's always a trade-off. So you want to use a service, you have to probably give back something. So is there something called a real privacy? Are we moving away from privacy as the dimension changing? So is privacy? I just again want to emphasize on that, and I also want to know from the panel, what is their futuristic view of the internet in 2030?
I'll jump in quickly on the privacy is dead question. I think I don't believe it is. I think it's important, and this point's been made at a couple of sessions earlier in the week. But I think it's important to remember that privacy is at the end all about you having the ability to make some decisions and exercise some choice about your data. I think those decisions and those realities still exist. They're clearly changing rapidly and perhaps narrowing rapidly as well. But I think, I think from a more positive perspective, I think the fact is that the general community is starting to become more aware of these issues. I think without praising them, I think organisations like Facebook and Google have actually done a lot of work in this area that has been putting these things front and centre of people's screens and saying, come and check your privacy settings. Now whether people do or not, at least it's sort of in their face and they are starting to think about it. And I think the other thing that's really starting to trigger people, certainly in Australia, is some of the advertising tracking that's going on, some of the sort of creepily specific ads that they start seeing appearing on websites, and people are starting to then realise, okay, I can see what's going on here, right? And I think we see the rise of ad blocking, ad blockers around the world as not only a pretty existential challenge to the sort of free publishing business model, and that's something they're going to have to work through. But to me, that's sort of consumers saying, actually, we're starting to understand what's going on here, and we're not comfortable with it, and it has to change. So that gives me some hope.
Okay, so sorry to tell. I was at this focus group sessions. The first group was a dozen millennials, people in high school, still dressed in a school uniform. Was observing them through this, the two-way glass, and they said they were concerned about privacy. So they said, "What about privacy? But you put information about yourself online." Yeah, we put information online, but we don't want people to know our contact addresses, our phone numbers. We don't want them to contact us. But our details of what we do, it's okay. The next session happened by chance to be people in their 50s, retirement, my age, right? My friends, dozen of them, and they said they were also concerned about privacy. They said, well, but you put, contact details, all this, that one we don't worry. But secrets, we cannot let the people know. Both sides are talking privacy, but one side concerns secrets, one side concerns personal data information, right? IoT, I think our secrets are still safe.
I think privacy is not, it is just socializing, That's like something like technology is changing, internet is changing. So, the core values, everything is changing. So we need to adapt. It's completely, IoT, it has its pros and cons, right? IoT can save life as well. So we have to understand that fact as well, because it can be a boon for a disabled, for a heart patient or even any other disease or disability condition. So it's just that we need to work on these issues with more focused multi-stakeholder concept, and we need to have more discussion, and we need to work it in a more proper way, right? Internet previously was just managed by technical communities. Right now, it is ours. It's everyone's. So with that, we have to accept open standards and move on. Just as Penguin said, it's there. So we just need to work on it with a proper approach. Thank you.
Well, to answer your question, I think first, I think it's okay to have sometimes conflicting interests between, within government saying like we need to protect the privacy of their citizens, but as well as doing works in terms of crime prevention, counterterrorism or things like that. But I think the really important point here is we need to have relevant legislations in place to counterbalance these acts, and to set a clear and solid oversight which is responsible to their citizens. And this, by doing that, we need to and education and awareness would be important. So this is not really shifting the responsibility to the consumers or to the people, but really just to equip them better in that sense, so that they can question their legislators, they can question their governments, saying, well, are you doing enough? Why aren't you doing that? And when that comes along, in a fully democratic society, which I don't really have, I think I need to apply for the right to be forgotten for my last comment. But point is, in that system, we would be able to make sure that happens, because the citizens, they are voters, and in turn they are customers for the legislators, to get them elected. Right, so that's one way of ensuring their rights or their privacy rights to be assured. Yeah.
Okay, I'll keep it real quick. And coming to your point, Mohit, I mean, it has never been the government part of the thing only. There are these private. The private part is also being in target. I mean, it's not only the government who have been playing actually with the privacy stuff. I mean, for example, the right to be forgotten in European Union, this cookies policy in European Union, the Google and the Chinese government issue that. I mean, so these big technology giants having issues related to cybersecurity and privacy things, those are theirs. But at times there is stuff that there is done by government which gets highlighted more time. So yeah, it's I mean the two will go side by side, and I really see them working together in harmony with each other to be able to realize a very productive and effective IoT environment for masses across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you. I tend to see privacy from two angles. The first is the general public, people like us, for whom the debate is really relevant. But if you look at a bunch of people whose life depends on confidentiality, for them privacy has been dead for many years now. None of the existing tools can be, even Tor. I am a user of Tor for many years now. Tor has been broken by several agencies. Tor is supposed to be the top in anonymity. Even there are some new tools coming up like Riffle from MIT. There is no guarantee that these have either not been broken or they will not be broken. Plus, most of these so-called companies which are kind of supposedly complying with the regulations have backdoors. So if your life depends on it, please do not believe that privacy exists. It does not exist. You'll be killed if you think so.
Thank you for all the panel members and the wonderful audience. I mean, you have been really, wonderful with all the questions. And we think that you have enjoyed the session as we did. So, we'll stop by probably applauding the panel member and the